My grandson Caleb shot up the basement stairs like he'd seen a ghost. His face was a pale, sweat-slicked mask, his eyes wide with a terror I had never seen in his 17 years of life. He grabbed my arm, his hand trembling. "Grandpa, pack a bag. We're leaving, now." I put my book down, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. The quiet afternoon was shattered. "Caleb, what is it? What's wrong?" He shook his head violently, pulling me towards the hallway. "No time. Please, Grandpa, just trust me. Don't call anyone." 20 minutes later, as we sped away from the house I had lived in for 40 years, my phone began to scream. My son Michael, then my daughter Brenda, over and over. Caleb glanced at the screen, his voice cracking. "Don't answer them." I never imagined that the greatest threat to my life would come from the two people I had created. Before I tell you how this nightmare unfolded, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. And hit like and subscribe if you believe that sometimes the quietest people have to make the loudest stand. 1 week earlier, that same quiet house had felt less like a sanctuary and more like a gilded cage. Michael and Brenda had arrived for their weekly wellness check, a ritual that had started shortly after my wife Clara passed 2 years ago. They came bearing bags of organic groceries I didn't ask for, and a suffocating cloud of concern that felt rehearsed. Michael, a real estate broker with a smile as polished as his Italian leather shoes, clapped me on the shoulder. "Looking good, Dad. Just want to make sure you're taking care of yourself." Brenda, who had perfected the role of the dutiful daughter, began unpacking kale and quinoa into my refrigerator, her brow furrowed with practiced worry. "We were just thinking, Dad, this big house, it's a lot for one person. The upkeep, the stairs, it's a burden." I sat in my armchair, the one Clara and I had picked out together, and listened. I spent 42 years as a forensic accountant. My job was to find the lie buried in a mountain of numbers, to see the story that the spreadsheets tried to hide. And as my children spoke, every instinct I had honed over a lifetime screamed that I was being audited. Their words were columns of figures that didn't add up. They spoke of my safety, but their eyes kept flicking to the crown molding the hardwood floors, the half-acre of land this house sat on in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood. They weren't seeing a home. They were seeing an asset. "We found this wonderful retirement community, Dad." Michael continued, pulling a glossy brochure from his briefcase. "State-of-the-art. 24-hour care. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." I looked at the pictures of smiling seniors playing bingo and felt a chill. It looked less like a community and more like a beautifully landscaped holding pen. Clara had loved this house. Her memory was in the rose bushes she planted by the fence, in the worn spot on the kitchen floor, where she used to stand in the very air I breathed. Leaving it felt like a second funeral. I just nodded noncommittally. "I'll think about it." Their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. They knew as I did that this was just the opening move in a game I didn't want to play. The following visit, they brought their strategy to the next level. Brenda arrived with a collection of white plastic boxes. "It's a smart home system, Dad. For your safety." Before I could protest, she was placing sensors on doors and windows. Michael, meanwhile, sat me down at the kitchen table with a stack of my own mail. "Look, Dad, you let a few bills slip past their due date last month. It's understandable. Why don't you let me handle all this for you? I can set up automatic payments from your account. You won't have to lift a finger." He made it sound like a kindness, a son easing his aging father's load. But my mind, the forensic accountant's mind, saw it for what it was, a request for access. For control. He wasn't offering to help me manage my finances. He was offering to manage them for me. The smart home system wasn't about my safety. It was about surveillance. They were building a case brick by brick that I was no longer competent, that I needed to be managed, protected, and ultimately removed from my own life. I felt a profound loneliness wash over me, a grief deeper than any I had felt since Clara's passing. The children I had raised, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, and whose report cards I had praised, were now looking at me and seeing not a father, but an obstacle. That night after they left, the house was silent again. But it was a different kind of silence. The sensors Brenda had installed blinked with tiny malevolent red lights. I felt like a stranger in my own home, a ghost in the machine of my own life, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that the final act was coming soon. That final act began as so many tragedies do around a dinner table. It was Sunday. Michael, Brenda, and Caleb were over for what was supposed to be a peaceful family meal. The air was thick with unspoken things. Michael and Brenda steered the conversation once again toward the house. "The market is peaking, Dad," Michael said, swirling wine in his glass. "We could sell this place for a fortune. Get you set up somewhere nice, and the rest would be a nice little nest egg for the whole family." Brenda chimed in, "Think of it, Dad. No more worrying about the lawn or the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom. Just peace of mind." It was a pincer movement, a coordinated attack disguised as loving advice. I looked at Caleb. He was staring at his phone, his thumb flying across the screen, utterly disengaged. He hated these conversations as much as I did. He suddenly looked up. "The Wi-Fi is really slow down here. I'm going to go check the router in the basement, see if I can reset it." He excused himself, clearly grateful for an escape. I watched him go, unaware that my 17-year-old grandson was about to walk into the heart of the conspiracy against me. The basement was my domain. A dusty archive of a life well lived. Old tax records, Clara's gardening tools boxes, of Caleb's childhood drawings. It was cluttered but organized. Caleb found the main router easily enough, but as he reached to unplug it, he noticed something else. Tucked away behind an old filing cabinet plugged directly into a junction box was a small black unmarked network device. There was no brand name, no FCC label, just a single pulsing blue light. His curiosity, the kind that only a tech-savvy teenager possesses, was piqued. This wasn't part of the standard internet setup. He pulled out his phone and ran a network scanning app. A few seconds later, a list of available Wi-Fi networks popped up. And there it was. An hidden SSID broadcasting a powerful signal. He ran a simple decryption tool. The network was password protected, but the password itself was an act of pure arrogance. Vance Legacy 2025. He typed it in. Access granted. A login screen appeared. It looked like the back end of a commercial security system. He tried another password, the name of his father's first dog, a piece of trivia he'd heard years ago. Bingo. He was in, and his blood ran cold. The screen populated with a dozen video feeds. The living room from an angle hidden inside the mantel clock. The kitchen from a tiny lens in the smoke detector. My study. Even my bedroom. Live streaming video of my entire life. He felt a wave of nausea, but it got worse. He clicked on a folder labeled Recordings. Inside were hundreds of audio files time-stamped. Every phone call I'd made, every conversation I'd had in my own home recorded. Then he saw the final folder. It was labeled Elias Project. He clicked it. It contained edited video clips. A clip of me struggling to remember an actor's name was cut to make me look confused and senile. A clip of me joking about misplacing my keys was presented as proof of memory loss. It was a meticulously crafted, malicious highlight reel of manufactured incompetence. And then the final file. A PDF document. He opened it. The title stared back at him from the screen, cold and legalistic. Petition for Emergency Guardianship of Elias Vance. It was a legal motion drafted by his father's lawyer, filled with fabricated medical reports from a doctor I'd never met, all designed to prove I was mentally unfit to manage my own affairs. It was a coup, a hostile takeover of a human life, his grandfather's life. He didn't even close the laptop. He just dropped it, and ran his footsteps pounding on the old wooden stairs, a desperate alarm bell signaling that the war for my father's soul had already begun. The motel room smelled of stale cigarettes and pine-scented cleaner. It was 100 miles from home, 1,000,000 miles from the life I knew. We were anonymous here. Just another old man and his grandson on a road trip to nowhere. Caleb had the laptop open on the flimsy particle board desk. The screen cast a sickly blue glow on his face, illuminating the fear that still lingered in his eyes. He didn't say anything. He just turned the computer towards me. And I looked into the abyss. I watched myself on the screen. It was me, but it wasn't. It was a character my children had created, a feeble old man designed to be pitied and then discarded. I saw myself in the kitchen, filmed from an obscene angle above the refrigerator, trying to remember the name of an actress from an old movie. I watched as I snapped my fingers, laughed at my own forgetfulness, and then moved on. But the clip Caleb showed me was different. They had edited out the laugh. They had looped the moment of hesitation, added a subtle, disorienting audio hum, making my simple lapse in memory look like a symptom of profound decay. It was monstrous. I remembered that moment. Michael had been there. He had smiled. "It's on the tip of your tongue, Dad." He had said it with such feigned patience, all the while his hidden camera was recording, gathering evidence for my execution. I saw a flicker of a memory, sharp and unwelcome. Michael, age 10, standing in the same kitchen. He had broken a ceramic bird, one of Clara's favorites, while playing catch in the house. His face was a mask of terror, expecting anger. I had knelt, put the pieces in his small hands, and said, "We don't hide our mistakes in this family, son. We face them. Honesty is the foundation we build everything on." He had cried not from fear, but from relief. I had held him and told him that nothing was so broken it couldn't be fixed by the truth. And now that same boy, now a man, was using lies to break me. The hypocrisy was a physical blow, knocking the wind out of my lungs. Caleb clicked on another file. This one was audio. It was Brenda's voice, saccharine and smooth, talking to someone on the phone. "He's just not all there anymore," she said, a little sigh of practiced sadness in her voice. "We have to do what's best for him. He gets confused about his finances, forgets to take his medication. It's a tragedy, but we have to be the responsible ones now." I felt my hands clench into fists. I had never, not once, forgotten my medication. My finances were more organized than her entire life. It was a performance. A lie told so smoothly, it was almost believable. I remembered Brenda at her high school graduation, her valedictorian speech filled with words about integrity and family. I had sat in the audience, my chest swelling with a pride so immense I thought I might burst. She had thanked me and Clara for teaching her the value of truth. I looked at the audio file's waveform on the screen, the digital peaks and valleys of her betrayal, and I felt like a fool. The pride I felt then was now a burning shame in the pit of my stomach. I watched them all. The videos, the audio clips, the carefully forged medical reports. I saw the entire architecture of their deception. It was meticulous, patient, and utterly ruthless. The pain was a living thing inside me. It was a cold, heavy stone of grief, not just for the betrayal, but for the death of the children I thought I knew. The son I taught honesty to, the daughter who spoke of truth. They were gone. In their place were two strangers, two predators who looked at their own father and saw only a dollar sign. I leaned back in the cheap motel chair, the vinyl sticking to my shirt. For a long moment, I felt nothing but the crushing weight of that stone. I wanted to break down. I wanted to rage. I wanted to call them and scream the question that echoed in the silent room, why? But then something else began to stir. It was a cold, quiet fire deep within me. The grief was still there, but it was crystallizing, hardening from a soft sorrow into a diamond edge of pure, cold clarity. The father in me was grieving, but the forensic accountant was waking up. For 42 years, I had hunted for the truth in the chaos of numbers. I had stared down corporate criminals who hid their sins in complex ledgers and offshore accounts. I had learned that every crime, no matter how clever, leaves a trail. Every lie has a tell. My children in their arrogance believed they were smarter than me. They thought I was just their old sentimental dad. They had forgotten who I was. They had forgotten what I did for a living. I looked at the laptop screen again. The video feeds the audio files, the fake documents. It was no longer a family tragedy. It was a crime scene. It was a balance sheet that didn't add up, and I was the only one who knew how to audit it. I looked at Caleb, who had been watching me, his face a mixture of fear and concern. I saw the reflection of a different man in his eyes. Not a victim. Not a broken old man. I saw an investigator. "They made a mistake," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the emotion that had been choking me just moments before. "A very, very big mistake." Caleb leaned forward. "What mistake?" I pointed a steady finger at the screen. "They thought this was a family matter," I said, the cold fire now burning bright. "But they've just started a war with a man who knows how to read the evidence, and they left a digital paper trail a mile long." I stood up, the weariness gone, replaced by a surge of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The transformation was complete. The father had stepped aside. The accountant was now in charge. I walked over to the desk and closed the laptop. The sudden darkness in the room felt like a punctuation mark, the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I turned to Caleb. The fear was still on his face, but now there was something else mixed in with it, confusion and a desperate plea for direction. He was looking to me to tell him what to do next, how to make sense of the senseless. And I would not fail him. My voice when I spoke was not the voice of his grandfather. It was the voice I used in boardrooms and depositions. It was calm, measured, and left no room for argument. First things first. I began ticking a finger in the air. We are now operating under a new set of protocols. Protocol 1. We are ghosts. Your phone. Give it to me. Caleb fumbled in his pocket and handed me his smartphone. I took out my own. I walked them over to the sink, turned on the tap, and held them both under the running water until the screens went black for the last time. Caleb made a small, choked sound. "But my photos, everything." I looked at him, my expression unyielding. "Everything on that phone is a tracking device. Your location, your contacts, your data. It's a liability we cannot afford. Consider it the first casualty of this war." I dried my hands on a rough motel towel. Protocol 2, we establish secure communications. Tomorrow morning we will go to a Walmart in the next town over. We will pay cash for 2 prepaid burner phones. We will never use them at this location. We will never call a number we both know. From this moment on, every piece of our digital footprint must be deliberate and untraceable. I saw a flicker of understanding in Caleb's eyes. This was his language. Technology. Networks. He was beginning to see the shape of the game board. Protocol 3. I continued pacing the small room like a general in a war tent. Evidence. You saved a copy of everything you found. Caleb nodded quickly. Yes, Grandpa. On this laptop. It's not connected to any of my cloud accounts. Good, I said. But it's not good enough. We need redundant offline copies. We will also buy a set of encrypted USB drives. We will make 3 copies of every file. 1 will stay with me. 1 will stay with you. The 3rd will be our insurance policy, and we will mail it to a location I will disclose later. If they manage to plant a surveillance network that's sophisticated in my house, we must assume they have tracking software on my personal computers. This laptop is now the only device we trust. Finally, I stopped pacing and looked at him directly. Protocol 4, and this is the most important one. We cut all contact. Michael, Brenda, your mother, your father, your friends, no one. Not a text, not a call, not a social media post. As far as the world is concerned, Elias and Caleb Vance have vanished. Their panic will be our shield. They will make mistakes. They will be loud, and we will be silent. We will be disciplined. We will let them thrash around in the darkness they created while we move with purpose in the light. Do you understand me? Caleb swallowed hard, but his gaze was firm. The boy who had run up the stairs in a panic was gone. In his place was a young soldier receiving his orders. He nodded a single sharp movement. "I understand, Grandpa." The word Grandpa sounded different now. It was no longer just a term of endearment. It was a title of allegiance. He saw what I was doing. I was taking their chaos, their emotional warfare, and I was turning it into a structured problem. I was creating a system, a ledger. On one side was their deception, on the other, our response. And I would not rest until the books were balanced. The path ahead was dark and uncertain, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I had a plan. And a plan for a man like me was everything. It was the first weapon drawn in a battle they had no idea was coming. The next morning, we drove 30 miles east to a different town, a place where our faces meant nothing. The Walmart was a sprawling universe of fluorescent lights and consumerism. We walked in paid cash for 2 of the cheapest prepaid phones. They had a pack of encrypted USB drives and a change of clothes. We activated the phones in the parking lot, using a fake name and the address of a library in a state 1,000 miles away. The whole process felt clandestine, like something out of a spy movie I was too old to be in. But this was my new reality. Back in another anonymous motel room, I took a deep breath and dialed the first number, a number I knew by heart. It rang twice. A voice, sharp and alert, answered. "Garcia." There was no hello, no preamble, just his name stated like a fact. "David, it's Elias Vance," I said. There was a pause on the line, but it wasn't a pause of confusion. It was a pause of sudden, focused attention. "Elias, it's been a while. I assume you're not calling to discuss the weather." I allowed myself a small, grim smile. David Garcia had been the lead digital forensics investigator on the Alistair Finch embezzlement case, the biggest case of my career. I had found the single thread of a lie in a billion-dollar company's accounts, and David was the one who had pulled on that thread until their entire digital empire unraveled. We had spent 6 months in a windowless room together, fueled by bad coffee and a shared obsession with the truth. We had forged a bond that went deeper than friendship. It was a bond of mutual professional respect. "I'm calling in that favor, David," I said. "The one from the Finch case." David's voice lost any hint of casualness. It became pure professional steel. "You never have to call in a favor, Elias. You just have to call. What do you need?" I gave him the summary, a cold, clinical recitation of the facts. Illegal surveillance, hidden cameras, microphones, a local encrypted network, edited video files, a petition for guardianship. I laid out the architecture of my children's betrayal as if I were describing a fraudulent accounting system. I kept my voice even, devoid of the pain that was still a raw wound inside me. When I finished, the line was silent for a few seconds. "Elias," David finally said, and his voice was low, laced with a cold anger that mirrored my own. "This is more than a family dispute. This is a criminal enterprise." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm calling you. The laptop my grandson used is the only clean device we have. It holds the evidence. I need you to tell me how to preserve it, how to ensure the chain of custody is unbroken." He didn't hesitate. "First, don't connect it to any hotel Wi-Fi, ever. The drives you bought, are they AES 256-bit encrypted?" "They are," I confirmed. "Good. Create a disk image of the entire hard drive. Not just the files, the whole drive. Then clone that image onto all 3 drives. I'll walk you through the software. This preserves the metadata, the timestamps, everything. It will be admissible. Then I want you to find a way to get me one of those drives and the laptop. I'll do a full forensic sweep, see what else they left behind. And Elias, my team can do a counter-surveillance sweep of your house. We'll find and document every last device they planted. We'll give your lawyer an evidence package so airtight they won't be able to breathe." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. It was the feeling of an ally stepping onto the battlefield. Thank you, David, I said. Just tell me where to send the package, he replied. And Elias, I'm sorry this happened. We're going to burn them to the ground. I hung up and took a moment letting David's words sink in. He hadn't offered pity. He had offered a plan of attack. Now for the second call. This one was different. This one was for the general who would lead that attack. I dialed the number for Evelyn Reed's private line. Her voice was exactly as I remembered it from a courtroom 10 years prior, crisp, clear, and utterly intolerant of nonsense. Evelyn Reed. I didn't waste time. Ms. Reed, this is Elias Vance. We worked together on the Sterling Mutual case. I remember you, Mr. Vance, she said. Her tone was neutral, but I knew that her mind, like a high-speed computer, was already accessing the relevant files from her memory. You're the accountant who found the ghost employees. What can I do for you? I repeated the story I had told David, but this time I framed it with the few legal terms I knew. Invasion of privacy, forged documents, potential financial fraud. I was speaking her language. She listened without interruption. There were no gasps of shock, no expressions of sympathy. Evelyn Reed did not deal in emotion. She dealt in facts, statutes, and leverage. When I was finished, she asked 2 questions. First, do you have tangible evidence of the surveillance and the guardianship petition? I do, I said. My grandson copied the files onto a laptop. Second, she continued, her voice becoming even sharper. Have you had any contact with your children since you discovered this? None whatsoever, I replied. Good, she said, and for the first time there was a hint of something in her voice. It was the sound of a predator that has just caught the scent of its prey. Mr. Vance, what your children have done likely constitutes multiple felonies under state and federal law. The illegal recording of audio and video wire fraud potential conspiracy. This is not a family squabble that gets resolved in therapy. This is a criminal matter. The words were stark, but they were exactly what I needed to hear. She was validating the severity of the situation, translating my personal pain into a language the justice system would understand. Here is what happens now, she commanded, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. You will not go home. You will not contact your children. You will follow the instructions of your cybersecurity expert to the letter regarding the evidence. I want one of the encrypted drives he is preparing for you. Send it to my office via courier. I will file for an emergency restraining order against both Michael and Brenda, preventing them from accessing your property, your accounts, or contacting you in any way. I will also be contacting their attorney, letting him know that his clients have engaged in felonious activity and that he may want to advise them on the prudence of retaining a criminal defense lawyer. We are no longer defending Mr. Vance. As of this moment, we are on the attack. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a weight I didn't even realize I was carrying. The chaos of the last 24 hours was being forged into a weapon. The fear was being replaced by a strategy. I was no longer just a father on the run. I was a client. And I had just unleashed a shark into the waters my children thought were their private swimming pool. Thank you, Ms. Reed, I said, my voice filled with a gratitude that went beyond words. Her reply was swift and certain. You don't need to thank me, Mr. Vance. You just need to let me do my job. A few days later, we were in a small, furnished apartment 2 states away, a place paid for in cash a month in advance. It was a sterile, impersonal box, but it was safe. It was our headquarters. An encrypted email arrived from David Garcia on a laptop he had couriered to us. The subject line contained a single word, report. I clicked it open. It was a detailed technical document, but it was also a story. And as I read the words and looked at the time-stamped photographs, my mind painted a vivid picture of the scene. I could see it all, as if I had been there myself, a silent observer watching the ghosts of my past being exorcised by the professionals of my present. In my mind's eye, I see an unmarked gray van pull up to the curb in front of my house. It's early morning, the light is still soft, and the street is quiet. Two men get out. They don't wear uniforms. They look like cable technicians or utility workers dressed in jeans and plain polo shirts, their faces anonymous and professional. But the heavy Pelican cases they carry hold something far more sophisticated than cable splitters. They use a key I provided to David, and the front door opens without a sound. They are inside my life. The first man, the team lead, pulls out a device that looks like an oversized tablet. It's an RF spectrum analyzer. He begins a slow, methodical sweep of the ground floor. I can almost hear the soft, rhythmic clicks as the device hunts for illicit radio frequencies, for the telltale electronic whispers of hidden transmitters. On the screen, a jagged line spikes. It's a signal that doesn't belong to the Wi-Fi or the cordless phone or any of the other household chatter. It's a parasite. The device leads him to the living room, to the old mantel clock Clara had inherited from her grandmother. A place of honor. A keeper of memories. The second technician opens his case. He works with the quiet efficiency of a surgeon. He uses a non-linear junction detector, a wand that he sweeps over the clock's wooden body. It beeps softly, confirming an electronic circuit hidden within. He carefully removes the back panel. And there it is, nestled amongst the old gears and chimes, a tiny camera lens no bigger than a pinhead. It's wired directly into the clock's own power source. Clever. My son Michael had insisted on having the clock professionally cleaned and serviced a few months ago. A gift, he had called it. I now see the photograph in David's report. The clock's inner workings exposed the malignant black eye of the camera staring out. They were watching me from inside my own memories. The technician doesn't touch it. He photographs it from every angle, tags it with a small evidence marker, and replaces the panel. The goal is not to disable. The goal is to document. They move to the kitchen. Another RF spike, this one coming from the ceiling. The team lead points to the smoke detector directly above the kitchen table where I sat every morning to read the paper. The second man brings out a small, flexible endoscopic camera, feeding it into the ventilation slit of the detector. On his wrist-mounted screen, an image appears. Another circuit board, another tiny lens positioned for a perfect panoramic view of the room where I ate my meals, where I spoke on the phone, where I lived, the quiet, unguarded moments of my life. Brenda had installed new smoke detectors throughout the house 6 months ago. "For your safety, Dad," she had chirped. The irony is a physical weight. They had turned a tool of safety into a weapon of betrayal. Photograph, document, tag. The sweep continues, a silent, meticulous ballet of technology and tradecraft. They use thermal imaging cameras to find the faint heat signatures of hidden power adapters tucked away behind bookshelves and inside wall outlets. They find a microphone, a tiny gray sliver taped to the underside of my desk, in the study, the very desk where I had helped them with their homework when they were children. They find another camera in the television, its lens hidden in the infrared sensor. They were watching me watch the world. The house, my sanctuary, reveals itself to be a prison stage, every room a set, and I, the unknowing actor in a tragedy they were directing. The final room is my bedroom, my last private space, the space I had shared with Clara for 4 decades. The team is almost reverent in their work here. The thermal imager picks up a faint heat spot from a digital alarm clock on my bedside table, a new one Michael had given me for my birthday. "Yours was looking a little old, Dad," he had said. They carefully disassemble it. The report shows a photograph of the clock's interior. It's not just a clock. Most of its internal space is taken up by a camera, a microphone, and an SD card. It was recording everything. Every restless night, every private sigh, every moment of vulnerability. This was the ultimate trespass, a desecration. It was an act of such profound, intimate cruelty that it took my breath away. They had not just wanted my house and my money. They had wanted my dignity too. They wanted to own every last piece of me before they threw the rest away. The technicians document this final violation with the same cold professionalism as all the others. They bag the clock, tag it, and place it in the case. I close the file on the laptop. The report is finished. David's team found a total of 12 devices, 12 vipers nested in the heart of my home. My children's love weaponized. Their concern a lie. I don't feel the hot rage I expected. Not anymore. That had burned out in the motel room. What I feel now is a cold, hard certainty. The certainty of a forensic accountant who has just reviewed the final undeniable evidence of a massive fraud. The emotional phase was over. David Garcia had given me the evidence. Evelyn Reed had given me the strategy. And my children in their greed and their arrogance had given me something I hadn't had in a very long time. A purpose. A final account that needed to be settled. And I would not stop until every last decimal point was in its proper place. While David's team was mapping the battlefield, in my home I knew another more chaotic scene was playing out across town. I didn't need cameras to see it. I had spent a lifetime studying my children. I knew their patterns, their ambitions, their weaknesses. I could reconstruct their panic from 2,000 miles away with the same certainty that I could reconstruct a fraudulent financial statement. Their confidence was a house of cards, and Caleb and I had just pulled out the foundation. I could picture Michael in his pristine home office, the one with the panoramic view of the city skyline, pacing back and forth his $1,000 suit, feeling like a straitjacket. His first 50 calls to me would have gone straight to a deadline. The next 50 to Caleb the same. Then the frantic accusatory calls to his sister would have begun. He's not answering, Brenda. Is he with you? And Brenda from her sterile white kitchen in the suburbs would have matched his panic with her own rising hysteria. Of course not. Why would he be with me? I thought he was with you. You were supposed to check on him this morning. Their first assumption would have been simple. The old man had wandered off, confused, disoriented. It was, after all, the very narrative they had been trying to build. They would have called the police playing the part of the worried, dutiful children. I can see the frustration on Michael's face as the police officer explains patiently that there are no signs of a break-in, no signs of a struggle. An elderly man is allowed to leave his own home. He is not, the officer would clarify, officially missing for at least another day. Their tool of choice, my supposed incompetence, was now working against them. How can you report a man missing when your entire argument is that he's incapable of making his own decisions? The beautiful, cruel logic of it must have been maddening for them. Then the second wave of panic would hit. The blame game. I can hear Michael's voice, low and venomous, over the phone. This was your idea, Brenda. The smart home, all that nonsense. It was too much too soon. You spooked him. And Brenda would have fired back, her voice shrill with indignation. My idea. You were the one pushing to sell the house every 5 minutes. You were the one talking about guardianship. You think he's deaf? He heard you, Michael. He heard the greed in your voice. They would tear at each other, their alliance of avarice crumbling under the first sign of pressure. For years, their shared goal had united them. Now, without that prize in sight, all that was left was their shared guilt. But the real terror, the cold, creeping dread that would have settled in their bones, would have come later. It would have arrived in the quiet moments between the frantic calls. A single terrifying thought passed between them in a hushed, fearful whisper. What if he's not confused? That question would have changed everything. What if the empty house wasn't a sign of his senility, but a sign of his clarity? What if our disappearance wasn't an accident, but a choice, an act of judgment? The possibility would have been a crack in the foundation of their entire worldview. They had seen me as an object, a problem to be managed. The idea that I might still be a player in the game, that I might have taken the game board and walked away, would have been inconceivable to them. And that is what would have terrified them most. They were no longer in control. The roles had been reversed. They were the ones left in the dark, and for the first time, they were the ones who had something to lose. For a full week, we let them marinate in their fear. Silence was our greatest weapon, a vacuum that I knew their own paranoia would rush to fill. In my mind, I saw their frantic energy slowly curdle into a grim, exhausted anxiety. They had lost the scent. They were hunters with no trail to follow, and the fear that they were now the prey would have been a constant bitter taste in their mouths. It was then, at the peak of their desperation, that we made our first move. It came in the form of a quiet, professional email sent from the office of Evelyn Reed. I didn't need to see their reactions. I could calculate them. I can picture Brenda in her sun-drenched kitchen scrolling through her phone when the email arrives. The sender's name, Evelyn Reed-esque, would have landed like a stone in her stomach. Her first thought would have been a jolt of pure dread. A lawsuit. Dad had hired a lawyer. He was fighting back. Her hand would have trembled as she called Michael, her voice a panicked whisper. "Michael, we've got a problem. A big one. He's lawyered up." And I see Michael in his glass-walled office pulling up the same email on his computer. He would have felt that same initial shock, the icy grip of consequence. But as he read the carefully crafted words, his fear would have given way to something else. Confusion, then a slow, dawning sense of triumphant relief. The email wasn't aggressive. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was the opposite. It spoke of my desire to find an amicable solution. It requested their presence at a meeting to discuss the future of the Vance estate and to facilitate a smooth transition of assets. It was the most beautiful, professional-sounding surrender he had ever seen. The phone call between them after that would have been a masterclass in self-delusion. Brenda would have been audibly relieved, her voice trembling with false emotion. "Oh, thank goodness, Michael. He's seen reason. He finally understands we were only trying to do what's best for him. The poor man must have been so scared and confused all alone." She would have already started rewriting the narrative, casting herself as the loving daughter who had patiently waited for her confused father to come to his senses. Michael's relief would have been cloaked in arrogance. I can almost hear his condescending chuckle. "See, what did I tell you?" He had no cards left to play. Running away was a bluff, a desperate last move, and he folded. Of course he did. He's an old man, Brenda. He got tired and scared. He would have interpreted the lawyer's involvement as a sign of my weakness, a formality needed to handle the paperwork of my capitulation. "This Evelyn Reed is probably just some small-time estate planner," he found. He'd say full of confidence. "She's just here to make sure the I's are dotted. We'll go and listen to his terms of surrender and sign the papers. This is it. We've won." They would have ended the call on a wave of shared euphoria, their brief period of fear now feeling like a distant memory. Their greed, which had been momentarily eclipsed by terror, would have come roaring back stronger than ever. They would start planning again, the sale of the house, the division of the assets. They would have walked around for the next few days with a secret smug smile on their faces, convinced of their own brilliance. They were the smart, savvy children who had successfully managed a difficult family situation. They had outmaneuvered their own father. They had no idea that the email wasn't a white flag of surrender. It was the friendly, inviting light on the front of an anglerfish luring them into the darkness, where the trap with its rows of razor-sharp legal teeth was silently waiting to snap shut. The law offices of Evelyn Reed were not located in a flashy downtown skyscraper. They occupied a historic brownstone on a quiet, tree-lined street, a building that radiated a kind of old-world power that made skyscrapers look cheap and temporary. The air inside smelled of lemon oil, old leather, and money so old it had forgotten how to brag. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft click of the receptionist's keyboard. This was a place where fortunes were dismantled, and empires were brought to their knees, all in a civilized, terrifyingly quiet manner. Michael and Brenda walked in their own lawyer, a man named Alan trailing a step behind them. They were dressed for victory. Michael in a tailored navy suit, Brenda in a cream-colored dress that cost more than my first car. They exuded an aura of success and righteous concern. They were the children who had stepped up, the ones making the hard decisions, and their attire was the costume for that role. Alan was a competent corporate lawyer skilled in contracts and mergers. He was a shark in his own pond, but he was about to discover that Evelyn Reed's office was the open ocean. "We have an appointment with Ms. Reed," Michael announced to the receptionist, his voice echoing slightly in the marble entryway. "Regarding the Vance estate." The receptionist, a woman with silver hair and an unnervingly calm demeanor, simply nodded. "Ms. Reed is expecting you. Please have a seat. She will be with you shortly." She gestured towards a sitting area with leather armchairs that looked like they had been there since the Civil War. As they sat, the confidence that had buoyed them for the past week began to feel a little thin. The sheer, unapologetic wealth of the office was intimidating. The walls were lined with original oil paintings, not the bland corporate art they were used to. A grandfather clock, much like my own, ticked in the corner, its deep, resonant chime a steady, unhurried heartbeat. It was a room that made you feel small, temporary. "Quite the setup," Alan muttered, looking around. "A bit theatrical, if you ask me." Michael scoffed, trying to regain his footing. "It's a negotiating tactic. All smoke and mirrors to justify an outrageous billable hour. Don't worry, Alan. We're in the driver's seat here." Brenda smoothed her dress, a flicker of unease in her eyes. "Where's Dad? I thought he would be here." Michael waved a dismissive hand. "He's probably too ashamed to face us. Or maybe this Reed woman advised him not to come. Easier for her to manage the surrender without him getting emotional. It's fine. It's better this way. Cleaner." Alan nodded, though he looked less certain. "Perhaps. Still, I would have preferred to have him present. It's unusual for the principal party in a negotiation like this to be absent." "Well, the whole situation is unusual," Brenda said, her voice a little too bright. "We just need to get this over with. For his own good." The receptionist's voice cut through their conversation, smooth and sharp as glass. "Ms. Reed will see you now." She led them down a long, silent hallway, the plush Persian runner swallowing the sound of their footsteps. The door to the conference room was a heavy, dark mahogany. The receptionist opened it and stepped aside. The room was dominated by a massive conference table polished to a mirror shine. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out onto a private, manicured garden. The air was cool and still, and sitting at the far end of the table alone was Evelyn Reed. She was a woman in her late 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a posture that radiated absolute authority. She was not smiling. "Mr. Vance? Ms. Vance? Mr. Croft?" She said, her voice calm and even. She gestured to the chairs opposite her. "Please sit." They sat. The chairs were heavy, and the silence seemed to press down on them. Michael cleared his throat, ready to take control of the meeting as he had planned. "Ms. Reed, thank you for arranging this. As you know, we're here to discuss our father's future. We're very concerned for him, and we're glad he's finally ready to accept our help." Evelyn Reed simply folded her hands on the table. She looked at Michael, then at Brenda, her gaze lingering for a moment too long. A gaze that felt like it was conducting its own forensic audit, seeing past their expensive clothes and rehearsed speeches. The confidence they had walked in with was now a faint memory. The room was too quiet. The woman across the table was too still. And my chair, the one they had expected me to be sitting in, was empty. The emptiness was a presence in the room, a silent question mark that hung in the air. The trap had been set. The door had been closed. And they were just beginning to realize that they hadn't walked in for a negotiation. They had walked in for a verdict. Evelyn Reed and I had planned this moment with the precision of a military operation. Her role was to be the immovable object, the silent granite wall against which their lies would break. "Let them talk first, Elias," she had told me over one of our secure calls. "Let them build their own cage bar by bar. It makes it so much more satisfying when you lock the door." And so from the quiet of my temporary apartment, I pictured the scene unfolding, every word, every gesture exactly as we had anticipated. I could see their lawyer Alan shuffling his papers, a man supremely confident in a battle he had no idea he had already lost. He would have started with an air of practiced solemnity, his voice smooth and reasonable. "Ms. Reed," he would begin. "My clients, Michael and Brenda Vance, are here today with a heavy heart. This is not a step any child wants to take." I can see Michael and Brenda on cue, their faces models of pained reluctance. Brenda would likely have a tissue in hand, dabbing at an eye that was perfectly dry. Michael would be staring at the polished table, the very picture of a son burdened by a terrible but necessary duty. It was a beautiful performance worthy of the stage. Over the past several months, Alan would continue, his tone shifting to one of clinical concern. Michael and Brenda have observed a significant and troubling cognitive decline in their father. There have been instances of memory loss, confusion regarding financial matters, and a general inability to manage the daily tasks of maintaining his home and his health. He would speak as if I were not a man, but a failing business in need of a corporate restructuring. He would use words like proactive management and mitigating future risk, sterile, bloodless phrases designed to strip the humanity from the act of stripping me of my own life. He would go on building his case on a foundation of lies. "They have made every effort to provide support," he'd say, gesturing to his clients who would nod in sad agreement. "They have offered to help with his finances to modernize his home for his own safety. But Mr. Vance has become increasingly resistant, even paranoid. His recent disappearance is frankly the final desperate confirmation of our fears. He is a danger to himself." Through it all, I see Evelyn Reed. She does not interrupt. She does not take notes. She does not shift in her seat. She simply watches them, her hands folded on the table, her expression neutral. Her silence would be a far more potent weapon than any argument. It would be an unnerving void, and Alan, used to the back and forth of corporate negotiations, would feel an increasing need to fill it. He would talk more, offer more details, over-explain, digging the hole deeper with every word. He would be presenting his case to a judge who had already read the final verdict. And my children, my brilliant, foolish children, would sit beside him, utterly convinced that the sound of their own lies was the sound of an inevitable victory. When Alan's voice finally faded, the silence he had tried so hard to fill rushed back in, heavier than before. Evelyn Reed let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, a tangible weight. She didn't look at Alan. Her eyes were fixed on my children. When she spoke, her voice was not loud, but it cut through the quiet with the chilling precision of a scalpel. "Thank you for that narrative, Mr. Croft," she said, her tone devoid of any emotion. "It was comprehensive. Now I would like to present a slightly different version of events. A version based not on concern, but on evidence." She picked up a small remote and gestured to a large discrete screen on the wall that Michael and Brenda hadn't even noticed. "You mentioned your father's cognitive decline," she said. "Let's look at an example." An image flickered onto the screen. It was me in my kitchen, looking confused. It was the clip they had manufactured, the one designed to make me look lost and senile. I could picture Brenda nodding sadly, perhaps squeezing Michael's arm in a show of familial grief. "Yes," she might have whispered. "It's so hard to watch." And now, Evelyn continued, her voice as calm as a frozen lake. "Let's look at the original, unedited footage from that same day." She pressed another button. The same scene played, but this time it included the moments before and after. It showed me laughing, snapping my fingers, and then saying, "Oh, what's her name? The actress from that old Hitchcock film. It'll come to me." It showed Michael smiling patiently, all while the hidden camera in the smoke detector captured the truth. The screen went blank. The difference was stark, undeniable. It wasn't evidence of my decline. It was evidence of their deceit. I can see the first crack appear in their composure. Michael's confident smirk would have faltered. Brenda's sad expression would have frozen on her face, turning into a grotesque mask of disbelief. Their lawyer, Alan, would have shifted uncomfortably in his seat. This was not in his script. Evelyn didn't give them time to recover. "You also mentioned modernizing the house for his safety," she said, her voice dropping a notch, becoming harder. "Let's review the upgrades." A new document appeared on the screen. It was the first page of David Garcia's technical report. The title was Stark: Covert Surveillance Devices Recovered from the Vance Residence. She began to read from the report, her voice a steady, damning monotone. Item 1: pinhole camera model A7 hardwired into a mantel clock in the living room. I can see Michael's face. The color would have started to drain from it, leaving a pale, waxy sheen under his expensive tan. Item 2: audio-video recording device model B4 discovered inside a smoke detector in the kitchen. I see Brenda's hand, the one with the tissue, clenching into a white-knuckled fist. Evelyn continued, a prosecutor reading an indictment. Item 3: cardioid condenser microphone taped to the underside of the desk in the study. Item 4: wide-angle lens camera discovered inside the infrared sensor of the television. She paused, letting the weight of each discovery land like a physical blow. Alan would be staring at the screen, his mouth slightly agape, the confident corporate lawyer, now looking like a man who had accidentally wandered onto a minefield. Michael and Brenda would be rigid, frozen in their chairs. They wouldn't be looking at each other. They couldn't. To look at each other would be to see their own guilt reflected back. "The list goes on," Evelyn said, her voice relentless. "A total of 12 devices, a comprehensive surveillance network designed not for safety, but for espionage. An illegal network, I might add. A felony in this state punishable by up to 5 years in prison. Per device." The word prison would have hung in the silent room like a blade. This had gone far beyond a simple family dispute over an inheritance. This was criminal. This was real. The final photograph appeared on the screen. It was the alarm clock from my bedroom. Its internal components exposed the camera and microphone nestled inside. That was the one that would have broken them. The sheer intimate violation of it. I can see Brenda finally letting out a small, strangled gasp. I see Michael's jaw clench so hard a muscle would have jumped along his cheek. Their performance was over. The masks had not just slipped, they had shattered. All that was left was the raw, ugly truth of what they had done displayed on a 60-inch screen in a room from which there was no escape. They were no longer the concerned children. They were criminals, and they had just been confronted with the undeniable proof of their crimes. The final pieces of evidence faded from the screen, leaving my children exposed in the cold, hard silence of the conference room. This was the moment of the final accounting, the closing entry in a ledger that had been unbalanced for far too long. I could see it as if I were there. Alan, their lawyer, would be pale, his corporate bluster completely gone, replaced by the grim understanding that he was witnessing a professional execution. Michael and Brenda would be shells. The arrogant, confident people who had walked in an hour ago had evaporated, leaving behind two terrified, defeated husks. And then I picture Evelyn Reed delivering the final surgical blows. She would slide two thick, leather-bound documents across the polished table. The sound would be the only one in the room, a soft, expensive whisper of impending doom. "My client, Mr. Vance, believes in order," she would say, her voice calm and dispassionate. "He believes that all actions have consequences. He has authorized me to offer you a choice as to what those consequences will be." She would tap the first document with a perfectly manicured finger. "Option A. We can end this meeting right now. My associate will walk these files, including the sworn testimony from the surveillance technicians and a full forensic accounting of the embezzled funds, directly to the district attorney's office. You, Michael, and you, Brenda, will be charged with multiple felonies: illegal wiretapping, conspiracy to commit fraud, financial elder abuse. You will be arrested. You will be in the public record. And you will, in all likelihood, go to prison." She would let the words settle, each one a stone dropping into a deep, dark well. "Your assets will be frozen. And Mr. Croft," she would add, turning her icy gaze on their lawyer, "you will likely face a review by the state bar for your role in drafting a fraudulent legal petition." Then she would gesture to the second document. "Or there is option B. You sign this agreement, right now, without negotiation." Alan, their lawyer, would instinctively reach for the document, his professional duty overriding his shock. He would open it. I know what he would see. He would see a comprehensive, legally airtight contract. It would stipulate their complete and permanent disinheritance from my estate. It would detail the repayment schedule for the money Michael had stolen with interest. It would contain a non-disclosure agreement so strict it would prevent them from ever even speaking my name in public again. It would be a legal cage, and they were being offered the key to lock themselves inside it. But the final lines of the document, the ones I had crafted with Evelyn, were the true master stroke. As Alan's eyes scanned those last paragraphs, I can picture his face going from pale to ashen. He would look up at Evelyn Reed, a new, deeper level of horror in his eyes, and she would give him a small, cold smile. "I see you've reached the final section," she would say, her voice laced with ice. "To be clear, this is not a negotiation for future assets. It is a formality. You see, your entire plan was predicated on the idea that my client's house was the prize." She would lean forward slightly, a predator closing in. "Last week, my client, Mr. Elias Vance, finalized the creation of the Clara Vance Irrevocable Trust. He has already transferred all of his major assets, including the house and his investment portfolio, into that trust." She would let that sink in. "The thing you were fighting for, the reason you committed multiple felonies, it was already gone. It was never on the table. The sole beneficiary of that trust upon my client's death is a scholarship fund established in his wife's name for his grandson Caleb and other deserving students." That was the checkmate. It wasn't just that they had lost. It was that they had lost before they even sat down at the table. Their entire scheme, their betrayal, their cruelty had all been for nothing. A ghost. They had burned their lives to the ground, trying to seize a property that could never be theirs. There would be no more words. What was there to say? I can see Alan, their lawyer, quietly pushing a pen across the table towards Michael. I can hear the faint scratching sound of a nib on heavy paper. It would be the quietest surrender imaginable. The sound of an empire of greed collapsing into a single defeated signature. A week later, I was back in my own kitchen. The house felt different. Lighter. David's team had removed every last wire and lens, and it was as if the walls themselves could finally breathe again. The silence was no longer heavy with suspicion. It was a comfortable, peaceful quiet. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. Caleb sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once been interrogated by my own children. He looked up from his book, a quiet question in his eyes. "Are you okay, Grandpa?" I poured steaming water into 2 mugs, the familiar ritual a comfort. I pushed one towards him. "I am now Caleb," I said, my voice softer than it had been in a long time. There was no triumph in me, no taste of victory, just a profound, bone-deep sense of peace. The storm had passed. For 40 years, I continued looking out at the garden Clara had so lovingly tended. I made a living auditing other people's assets. I could find a single misplaced dollar in a billion-dollar company, but I forgot to audit my own. Caleb looked confused. "Your own assets, but you saved them all." I shook my head, a small smile touching my lips. "No, I saved the money. I saved the house. Those are just numbers on a page. The real assets, they aren't on any spreadsheet." I reached across the table and placed my hand on his shoulder. "Trust, Caleb. Honesty, dignity. That's the real portfolio. That's the only inheritance that truly matters." He nodded, a slow understanding dawning on his young face. We sat there in the warm, quiet kitchen, 2 survivors in our reclaimed sanctuary. The battle was over. The books were balanced. And the truest assets were finally secure. The greatest lesson from this ordeal is not about victory, but about valuation. My children saw a frail old man and a valuable property. They were blind to the assets that truly defined my life. They forgot that a lifetime of quiet observation forges a strength that overt greed can never defeat. True power isn't found in what you can seize, but in the truth you are willing to defend. In their rush to claim a material inheritance, they forfeited the only one that truly matters, a legacy of trust and dignity. They simply failed to audit their own character. Share your own story in the comments below if you have ever had to remind someone of your strength, and subscribe for more tales of justice served.